Hello everyone, welcome back to the second part of print culture and the modern world. As we have already discussed in the previous subunit about the first printed book and the first form of print technology that evolved, those evolution and emergence were in China, Japan, and Korea. So now, how print traveled? Print actually would not travel. So the print technology or the early form of print became known to the Western countries to Europe. So from Asia to Europe, the advent of print will discuss. The different topics that we'll discuss today are advent of print to Europe, luxury editions of books, steps taken by the booksellers to fulfill the demand of books in Europe before the advent of printing machine, failure of manuscripts to satisfy the ever-increasing demand of books in Europe. And you would be able to highlight the advent of print to Europe, tell about the luxury editions of printed books, and would be able to answer the questions like steps taken by the booksellers to fulfill the demand of books in Europe, and also explain the failure of handwritten manuscripts to satisfy the ever-increasing demand for books in Europe. So the first topic here is advent of print to Europe. How print became known to the Western countries. So the first point is Chinese paper reached Europe via Silk Route. So the people used to trade through Silk Route, and it was a very famous route through which silk, spices were traded, cotton products were traded. And you have got the information about it in the previous chapter, the age of industrialization, as well, about the flourish trade of India. So this route was very much responsible for the advent of print to Europe. Another thing is production of manuscripts began. The handwritten texts are called manuscripts. So, as we have discussed in the previous unit about calligraphy, the art of stylized writing, and the manuscripts that you write, and that is for the copied. Even today, when you would write a book or when you would write anything to be published, so that is called manuscripts. So it's not limited to the handwritten today. Today we call even something that I have typed with me, that's not printed, typed with me, or typed and then it would be sent for printing. So that would also be called as manuscripts. Okay. However, the manuscripts that we are talking about here were the handwritten text by the original writer. Marco Polo brought woodblock printing technology to Italy. He was an Italian explorer who visited China. So when people go to different places, they get information, and information is then spread. So similarly, Marco Polo, when returned back to Italy, to Europe, he spread the technology. He told people about the technology. Eventually, in Europe, the demand for books increased. And another important point here, although different or the basic printing started with the help of woodblock printing, as the technology already spread in Europe, that came from Asia, but still there was importance of luxury editions, and the luxury editions which were made for aristocrats were still handwritten on vellum. Vellum was a parchment made from the skin of animals on which the books were or the texts were written. Now, let's understand the quality of luxury editions or the features of luxury editions. The luxury editions were handwritten, they were not woodblock printed. The aristocratic people, the rich people preferred to have luxury editions, and they were handwritten. They were written on very expensive vellum. We have already discussed about vellum, that it was a thin parchment made from skin of animals. And luxury editions were expensive, so they were meant for aristocratic circles, rich people, and rich monastic libraries. Now let's discuss about the advent of print to Europe that we have discussed in detail here. So for centuries, silk and spices from China flowed into Europe through the Silk Route, as we have discussed. And in the 11th century, Chinese paper reached Europe via the same route. Through the same route, the Chinese paper reached, and it was paper that made possible the production of manuscripts carefully written by scribes. So manuscripts were reproduced and carefully written by scribes, and when we say scribe, means somebody who writes or who copies text. They are known as scribes. Then in 1295, Marco Polo, who was a great explorer, as we discussed in the keywords and in the previous mind map, he returned to Italy after many years of exploration in China, and of course the knowledge transfer happened. China already had the technology of woodblock printing. Marco Polo brought this knowledge back with him, and Italians began producing books with woodblocks. And of course, it speeded up the printing process, the production process, and soon the technology spread to other parts of Europe. We have discussed about luxury editions. They were handwritten, written on expensive vellum, meant for aristocratic circles and rich monastic libraries, which scoffed at printed books as cheap vulgarities. So there was a psychology among the rich that the printed one, which used to be cheap, they were considered as cheap vulgarities, and the rich people, the high class people, the aristocrats, you already know about aristocrat, we have discussed in the previous chapter, the age of industrialization. They never preferred the woodblock printed books. They wanted expensive books, and you can compare this with the previous unit chapter, like we have discussed in the age of industrialization, that rich people preferred handmade products. So correlated, and here rich people or the aristocrats or bourgeoisie, they preferred handwritten books. Merchants and students in the university town bought the cheaper printed copies. Of course, they were students, so students and merchants used to purchase cheaper printed copies made by woodblock or printed by woodblock printing. Now let's throw some light on Marco Polo. So you can see the picture of this personality, Marco Polo. Marco Polo, 1254 to 1324, he was a Venetian merchant, Italian merchant, believed to have journeyed across Asia at the height of the Mongol Empire. So at that time there was spread of Mongol Empire in China. He first set out at age 17 with his father and uncle, traveling overland along what later became known as the Silk Road, as we discussed about Silk Road. His travels are recorded in the Travels of Marco Polo, also known as Book of the Marvels of the World, and 2 million, circa 1300. So when we say circa, it means approximate value. When the century is not known, exact date is not known, so that is called circa. We use this particular symbol, small c, so around circa 1300. Now let's talk about the steps taken to meet the demand for books in Europe. So the demand for books increased in Europe, and how the demands were fulfilled, how the demands were met is important to know and understand. The booksellers export to different countries. Why? So booksellers export to different countries booksellers started exporting books to different countries, and book fairs were organized where people could go and see different books available. Production of handwritten manuscripts started. As we discussed in China, similarly here in Europe, handwritten manuscripts were also in trend, and people, the skilled handwriters and the scribes were employed. Demand was there, so more and more handwriters or the scribes were employed to write books, to copy books, and the use of woodblock printing helped in meeting the demand for books in Europe. Now you can see here, this is Jigye. The Jigye of Korea is among the world's oldest existing books printed with movable metal type. It contains the essential features of Zen Buddhism. That is a different sect of Buddhism. About 150 monks of India, China, and Korea are mentioned in the book. It was printed in late 14th century. While the first volume of the book is unavailable, the second one is available in the National Library of France. This work marked an important technical change in the print culture, and that is why it was inscribed on the UNESCO. So in the UNESCO list, this book has been considered as Memory of the World Register in 2001. Now let's talk about manuscripts. As we have discussed that manuscripts were expensive, of course. Handwritten, it used to take a lot of time in copying and writing. So the question is that whether manuscripts were able to fulfill the demands of the people in Europe. So of course not. So failure of manuscripts to satisfy the ever increasing demand of books in Europe. Copying was an expensive, laborious, and time consuming business. So it used to take a lot of time to produce books by copying. Manuscripts were fragile and awkward to handle. So they were fragile, means weak, and could be destroyed easily, and they were awkward to handle, not easy to handle. They could not be carried around or read easily. It was difficult to carry the vellum, the skin parchment of animals, carry from one place to another place, and it was not also easy to read the manuscripts. And their circulation was limited. It was not easy to circulate manuscripts everywhere. Somebody written manuscript at a particular place, carrying those manuscripts was a big challenge, and that is why also it failed. And there was need for quick and cheap production. Since there was demand of books in Europe, therefore, it was required to have quick and cheap production, and that could not have been possible through manuscripts, and hence woodblock printing or faster printing method was required. So, of course, as I said, because of the failure of manuscripts, woodblock printing popularized. With the growing demand for books, woodblock printing gradually became more and more popular. By the early 15th century, woodblocks were being widely used in Europe to print textiles, playing cards, religious pictures with simple brief text. Everywhere there had been use of woodblock printing. There was clearly a great need for even quicker and cheaper reproduction of text. Even woodblock printing was not sufficient, however, undoubtedly it had speeded up the production process. This could only be possible with the invention of a new print technology. Now, there was a demand to have a new print technology faster than woodblock printing. The breakthrough occurred at Strasbourg, Germany, where Johann Gutenberg developed the first known printing press in the 1430s. Till that time, it was all manual. Woodblock printing was also a manual process, and since there was a huge demand in the market for books and the printed material, a breakthrough was required, and a mechanized version of printing was required, and eventually the breakthrough came from Johann Gutenberg, and the first printing press developed by him in the 1430s. So now you have assignments based on the text that we have discussed. So all the questions are based on what we discussed today. Discuss the advent of print to Europe. What do you mean by vellum? Discuss the features of luxury editions of books before the print revolution. Who brought the print technology? Marco Polo. Why was it not popular in aristocratic circles? Who purchased the wood printed books? So you have all these questions. The most important one here, the sixth one, which is an activity based question, that you would need to imagine yourself as Marco Polo and write a letter to your friend from China to describe the world of print which you have seen there in 150 to 200 words. This is not a board question. This is for your enrichment. All the questions are in the description as well. Thank you and have a wonderful day ahead.